You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Today's show is brought to you by Vanguard. As we step into a new year, it's the perfect time for all the advisors listening to think about how to set up your clients for success. One way to do that is to level up your fixed income strategy. But bonds are tricky, the market is huge, rates shift, and risks hide in plain sight. That's why having a partner with scale and expertise matters. Vanguard brings both. You don't want a roller coaster ride for investors. Some managers are out there promising big returns, but they usually come with big risks. Vanguard takes a steadier approach. They don't go all in on risky bets. They focus on reliability. They focus on consistency. So, if you're looking to give your clients consistent results year in and year out, go see the record for yourself at Vanguard.com/audio. That's Vanguard.com/audio. All investing is subject to risk. Vanguard Marketing Corporation, distributor.
As a longtime foreign correspondent, I've worked in lots of places, but nowhere as important to the world as China. I'm Jane Perlez, former Beijing bureau chief for the New York Times. In our third season of Face Off, the US versus China, we'll explore some of the biggest issues dividing these global powers today. Trump and Xi Jinping, AI, China's growing military might, and also robots. New episodes of Face Off are available now, wherever you get your podcasts.
And what really drives the 25th Amendment is this. The nuclear era. It's very rare to have a constitutional amendment. We've had a country for 250 years now, and it's 27 times, and the last time was more than 30 years ago. And since the last amendment, the 27th Amendment, was really an extension of a movement from the 1790s, a law student's project using past ratifications and things like that and brought to a Secretary of State, not a national movement, a very small minor movement in legal circles. Really the last full involved big change amendment, with the 26th Amendment allowing 18-year-olds to vote in federal elections. So you can see how rare. It's really been a long time since we've exercised the difficult process of constitutional amendment. That's why each one does become important in a sense. And today we're going to talk a bit about the 25th Amendment because you hear it thrown around quite a bit. Now, in the Constitution as written, Congress may by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability, both of the president and the vice president, declaring what officer shall then act as president, and such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed or a president shall be elected. Now, right before that, it says the first one is the vice president. We know that. Something happens to the president, first one is the president. And this has happened on 3 occasions, 1792, 1886, and 1947, with a slight revision to the 1947 Act in 2006 to address the new Homeland Security Department. Congress has addressed and created a line of succession. In 1792, Congress says, if something happens to the president, and then something happens to the vice president, the next in line is the president pro tempore of the Senate. Then it's the Speaker of the House. So this brings in the legislative branch, elective officers, but people that could be a different faction than the president. Officially, they weren't thinking about factions in 1792, and this could be part of the reason. It was a federalist government with a federalist president, a federalist majority in Congress. Yes, they're seeing some people start forming clubs and making movements, but they think it's all one government. So, hey, bring in... and so the Senate pro tempore, that's the effectively the president of the Senate when the vice president isn't presiding over it. So the next person you think of as the big figure in the Senate would be that president. It's often the oldest member of the Senate, admired figure within the senators, and it was seen as that would be a good choice. Willie Person Magnum, Lafayette S. Foster, and Benjamin Wade could have been president at different times. Benjamin Wade the Senate pro tempore could have been president if Andrew Johnson was impeached. Lafayette Foster could have been president if Andrew Johnson was assassinated at the same time as Abraham Lincoln, which was part of the assassin's plans. And then Willie Person Magnum would have become president if John Tyler was part of the disaster on the USS Princeton, the exploding of the engine that occurred while he was on board and his Secretary of War died. But this never happened. So far, the Senate pro tempore has never become president. Changes in 1886. They see that Garfield has been assassinated. Chester Arthur ascends to the presidency. It's not a change in party, but it's a change in political faction. And during the time that Garfield's in his sickbed recuperating, he's still president, there had been a need to replace the pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, and these offices were vacant. Congress seizes upon this and says, when Grover Cleveland's elected in 1884, now VP Hendricks dies in 1885, they say, okay, there's something going wrong here. And Senator George Hoar in 1882 raises the possibility of confusion and trouble. This is a very 19th century comment. He says, go with the Secretary of State because many secretaries of state, 6 of them, have gone on to become elected president. And so in 1886, they replace Senate officers and the Speaker of the House in line of succession with the cabinet secretaries. There's party consideration that there wasn't as much of in 1792. And so in 1886, they're thinking we can't switch between Republicans and Democrats because somebody was shot by an assassin's bullet. It could even, it's a bad incentive, if nothing else. So let's keep the party the same because it's going to be officers that the president appointed that are going to be in the line of succession. It changes in 1947 when President Truman urges that after Franklin Roosevelt's death, that there needs to be elected officers. Crucially, the elected officers, the Congress and the presidency, are held by the same party. And Speaker Rayburn is a good friend of Truman. And I think it made for an easy image of what might happen in the need for a succession. It's also important to note that until 1949, Truman had no VP. So if anything happened, it was going to the Secretary of State. And Truman strongly recommended that switch to the Congress. And we have that in place today with minor changes. It goes first to the 2 officers in Congress, the Speaker of the House, President pro tempore, and then the various cabinet officers in rank, starting with the Secretary of State. Less addressed in all of these things, all of these changes, is disability. And when you have Kennedy assassinated in 1963, there's going to be a reminder. If I had been recording this podcast a little bit earlier, and after a research round, I might have said it's the reason, it was the driver. And now I no longer think so. It's in fact in 1958 when Estes Kefauver gets up on the Senate floor and says there has to be a better Presidential Succession Act. And something like the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, more than the Kennedy assassination, actually pushes this event forward. It's also pushed forward by a forceful new senator from Indiana, and that is Birch Bayh. The Senate approves a potential amendment to deal with presidential succession in 1964, and then the House passes it in 1965. So the Senate actually has to vote twice. Senate passes it both times with no opposition. The House passes it with 368 votes for, 29 against. 2 years later, enough states had ratified it to become law. Crucially, amendments are approved by the people, and so presidents have no role in constitutional amendments, but Lyndon Johnson still had a TV conference when the Secretary of State receives the ratifications from the states. Section 1 of the 25th Amendment is not a controversial part, but it merely confirms that when William Henry Harrison dies in 1840, 1. And John Tyler takes over. He insists that though the Constitution only says the powers, the duties and powers devolve upon him, he will accept the title of President of the United States. And he is, in fact, President. It doesn't matter in terms of power, because the Constitution makes that clear. All the powers devolve upon the president, but it does matter, for other reasons, political reasons, I suppose. There was definitely a cabinet in place that was more loyal to the Whig Party. Tyler had been a recent convert. Section 1 confirms what John Tyler thought, that upon the death of the president, the vice president becomes president, not just an acting, president. There had already been adequate precedent for this from Millard Fillmore, Andrew Johnson, Chester Arthur, Teddy Roosevelt, Cal Coolidge, Truman. Not much there. Section 2 governs the president, gives the president an ability to appoint a replacement for a vice president. Now, this has been done. Lyndon Johnson had no VP from 63 to 65. So he's really eager to get this passed. Interesting here is 2 proposals that were batted down. One is Senator Keating of New York wants 2 vice presidents. Why not have multiple VPs? Separate the executive VP, the one that helps the president, from the legislative VP, the one that's president of the Senate. You're also going to give multiple options to go to if you need a successor. It makes all the sense of the world, according to Senator Keating, to have 2 vice presidents. It doesn't move forward. Richard Nixon suggests, and he's a big part of the 25th Amendment, a bigger part than people may be aware of. He suggests reconvene the last electoral college, bring it back. It has that authority. It had picked a president. It has the authority to pick a vice president. That's rejected. So Section 2 has one clause that gives that power to the Congress. So the House and the Senate vote. If there's a vacancy with the vice president, House and Senate vote to pick a new vice president. It's been used twice. It's been used with Ford during the Nixon administration, and then Ford picked Rockefeller to be vice president when he, in turn, took over for Nixon. And that's the only time that part of the 25th has been used. Everything else in the 25th deals with inability, which it was thought that none of these succession acts and none of the language in the Constitution deals with adequately enough. In this area, you have to consider that, first of all, you have Eisenhower becomes president. He's a little bit older. Nixon's younger. Eisenhower and Nixon sign a letter of agreement released to the public on March 3rd, 1958. In the letter, the vice president and the president agree that the vice president would assume presidential powers in the event the president declared himself unable to perform his duties. If the president was not in a position to declare himself unable to perform his duties, the vice president, after consulting with whomever he deemed appropriate, would make a determination of inability. In either case, the president would determine when the inability had ended, and the powers would immediately be restored. President Kennedy and Vice President Lyndon Johnson sign a similar letter on August 61, reflecting that they want to continue this arrangement and that there's some anxiousness. So Section 3 is, in effect, codifying into constitutional law what had been these side agreements between presidents and vice presidents in the beginning of the nuclear era when you faced a threat, potentially. And it basically says a president on his own volition can say, I am unable to perform my duties, send a letter, and the VP takes over such powers and duties. Section 3 does not make the vice president president, crucially. It just makes him act as president, assume the powers and duties. And so it also contains this provision. When the president feels that he is able, he sends a letter and then takes the presidency back. Then there's 4. 4 is when the president doesn't or can't write such a letter. The president, as I said, let's say there's been a paralyzing attack in the United States. Let's say the president has a stroke, suffers mental capacity. What do? We can no longer accept the president as a player in this. And so, like with a lot of things in the Constitution, well, you have a vice president for the reason, and the 25th is no difference. The way it's written, the vice president then becomes the crucial player. The vice president and a majority of the principal officers of the executive departments. That has some language there to examine. Or such body as Congress by law may establish. So in a sense, this allows the vice president to, even if the president cannot agree, to take over the presidency. Let's read it in whole because there's a lot to it. Whenever the vice president, a majority of either principal officers of the executive departments or such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmit to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable, the vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office. Thereafter, when the president transmit to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House his written declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the vice president, a majority of either the principal officers of the executive department or such other body, transmit within 4 days to the Speaker of the pro tempore of the Senate, Speaker of the House, their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge. So 4 actually there allows for a situation where there's conflict. We have a vice president saying, you're disabled, and a president saying, I'm disabled. I'm not disabled. Okay? And how it works is, at first, the vice president immediately assumes those powers. But then, if the president says, I am able, he immediately assumes it back. This allows for no funny business, in quotes, around this amendment. It is not, maybe Hollywood writers' dreams aside, intended to just, have vice presidents boost their career by becoming president. It has that provision. The president can take it right back. But then there is a provision. Let's say the president is, cuckoo, right? Within 4 days. So there's a limited time clock there. Within 4 days, the VP and the cabinet together, a majority of them, can say, no, the president really is unable. We really need to take this thing over. It now goes to Congress. Thereupon, Congress shall decide the issue, assembling within 48 hours for that purpose, if not in session. If the Congress within 21 days determines by a 2/3 vote of both houses, very high number, by the way, 2/3 vote of both houses, that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall continue to discharge the same as acting president. Otherwise, the president shall resume the powers and duties of his office. Wow. So it goes to Congress. If they're in session, they can vote immediately. If they're not, they have to vote within 48 hours. Okay? They will make this determination. It is a higher standard than impeachment. So this whole amendment is designed to avoid funny business. It's supposed to be really for a situation where the president cannot operate. And so if they can't get 2/3 of both houses, very high standard, then the vice president gets it back. So this is intended to have both instant ability to execute some lawful orders and have people like the Army or, say, the nuclear codes following it. As Birch Bayh said, pretty much the principal author of this amendment, as Kefauver had passed away in 1963, Bayh said about the Cuban Missile Crisis, I think it was impossible for it to not be on the forefront, not the back of my mind. Nixon wrote to Kefauver during these hearings, with the advent of the terrible and instant destructive power of atomic weapons, the nation cannot afford to have any period in time where there is doubt or legal quibbling as to where the ultimate power to use those weapons resides. And Senator Keating said, of New York, a Republican, failing to take action in this era would result in paralysis at the very time that quick and cogent decision-making was imperative. So you have both Republican and Democratic forces working together to get this amendment passed, and history has shown that that's usually the only way these things pass. A couple of things to address here. One is that this is very much president-friendly legislation, political party-friendly legislation, friendly to the political party that's in office. So it's the vice president that has to initiate action. Since really the 1960s, you could say there was a little difference between LBJ and Kennedy, but, since then, it's generally the president that has a big role in picking the vice president at the presidential nominating convention. Okay? And then cabinet officers are appointed by the president. So these are all president-friendly people, presumably, who are making decision as to the inability of the president. Now, there's two comments to make there. One is that things can change. Of course, vice presidents can become unfriendly to a president over time. There might be slight differences between them anyway, because even though the president pretty much approves the selection of a vice presidential candidate at a convention these days, sometimes that's for political reasons. Reagan wasn't a huge, friend of George H.W. Bush. There were some political reasons in that choice. Same with the cabinet. You could appoint a cabinet officer who now doesn't like the president very much, and then decides to go along with the vice president in declaring the president unable. Or, let's go with a more positive situation, these cabinet members are aware that there's a problem that needs to be addressed, and they go along. Could the cabinet be fired by the president? Well, it seems like once the letter's transmitted, they cannot be. So, maybe the president fires them before they're able to meet and get that letter out to Congress. There's a lot of room for some trouble right there. Today's show is brought to you by Vanguard. As we step into a new year, it's the perfect time for all the advisors listening to think about how to set up your clients for success. One way to do that is to level up your fixed income strategy. But bonds are tricky, the market is huge, rates shift, and risks hide in plain sight. That's why having a partner with scale and expertise matters. Vanguard brings both. You don't want a roller coaster ride for investors. Some managers are out there promising big returns, but they usually come with big risks. Vanguard takes a steadier approach. They don't go all in on risky bets. They focus on reliability. They focus on consistency. So, if you're looking to give your clients consistent results year in and year out, go see the record for yourself at Vanguard.com/audio. That's Vanguard.com/audio. All investing is subject to risk. Vanguard Marketing Corporation, distributor.
On Who Arted, we discuss art in a way that's fun and accessible for everyone who wants to explore the visual arts in an audio medium. Each week, we focus on the stories that make up art history, with emphasis on finding the good in all sorts of artworks, and I mean all sorts. I cover the traditional stuff you'd learn in any art history course, but with fun facts your professor probably never shared. Art is all around us, and art should be accessible for all of us. Who Arted is dedicated to celebrating the artists and artworks that shape our perceptions of the world, while helping us envision a better tomorrow. So please follow Who Arted wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Another point to make is that Congress also has a provision that allows for such other body as Congress may determine. Now, they have to do it before there's such an incident. That's a key thing here. So right now, there is no such body that was envisioned in the 25th Amendment, from 67. Congress has never acted to establish such a body. In discussions, Keating, Robert F. Kennedy, who became a part of the discussions when he took Keating's seat and then was debating as a senator in 65. Obviously, this topic was important to him, his brother having been assassinated as president. He asked this question about doctors. Is this intended to be doctors? And it was established by the senators that this would be a political decision first. But if Congress wanted a team of doctors, this such other body provision would enable Congress to say it can be a panel of doctors that could decide. It could be a committee of Congress that could decide. It could be a group of governors that could, it's such body as they might present. I was even thinking, these days it could be a poll of Americans, as long as it's a legitimate poll and these are real people, and it's all done ahead of time and signed into law. That's a key. So the sitting president has to sign the legislation enabling this such other body into law. I can imagine right now if you've proposed, let's establish under the 25th this panel of doctors that will determine if the president's okay. He's never going to sign anything like that. That's probably why the legislation hasn't been enacted or passed. But it all is possible. There's just one key. It's always the vice president and. That's in the constitutional language. You can't change that with statute. So it's vice president and this other body or the cabinet. So right here, I think that you hear a lot of debates about 25th. We should institute this. It's not really set up to be what sometimes it's pretended to be, like a way to get rid of a president that you don't like or whose issues you don't like or things like that. It's not intended for that. It's not going to work that way. It's actually harder than impeachment. So why would you pursue this angle? It is for a real case where there's a real disability. Now, I want to talk a little bit about a ratification because in 3 states, there's a little bit of a problem with ratifying the 25th Amendment, which you see for a couple of reasons. First is Pennsylvania, and Democrat Eugene Gelfand, he's of the party that controls the state house in Pennsylvania at this time. There's some concern that Section 4 is going to create a confusion, a power struggle within the executive branch that is unacceptable at any time. He says, let's not rush pell-mell down the road to madness. He says this amendment was written too quickly. Now, force in passing this is the American Bar Association. And they mobilized federal, state, and local bar associations. They met with members of the Pennsylvania legislature to put pressure on Gelfand to allow the process to move forward. With the support of the ABA, it does pass in Pennsylvania. You go to Arkansas, and here Birchby had met with Democrat Governor Orville Faubus of Arkansas, got him on board. Faubus said he hoped Congress would pass the amendment. There's a representative, Paul Van Dalsen, who has an article by Professor George Heimbaugh that appears in South Carolina's Law Review, entitled Vice Presidential Succession, a criticism of the buy-seller plan, which criticized the amendment's lack of specific provisions to deal with a nuclear attack. So one of the things that's coming out of the states during the states that have debates over this amendment is that you keep talking about this being about the nuclear era, but why don't you just put a provision in the amendment that says in the event of such an attack, here's how it's going to work. The simultaneous death of all in the line of succession is a nuclear age reality, but the buy-seller plan does not meet this danger. This is what the South Carolina law article reveals. The amendment's not useful because it grants Congress powers it already had. It already has the power to designate successors to the presidency that would not be affected by a nuclear attack on Washington, D.C. Congress under Article 2 has the power to extend the line of succession to include high-ranking officials who might be in Oregon or in Illinois and then wouldn't be present in the White House or in Congress doing their job in Washington, D.C. in the event of an attack. Nonetheless, Arkansas passes the ratification in 1965. And this is important. These are the early states because if there's too much debate in any particular state, that can affect the other state ratifications. I mean, it's been a while since we had to deal with amendment politics. You get Arkansas and Pennsylvania on board, it starts cooking. But Colorado's a little bit of a problem. There's an article in the Denver Post which says the 25th Amendment has serious defects. It does not deal, for instance, with vice presidential inability. What if both the president and vice president were simultaneously unable to serve? The Denver Post says this is dangerous omission because a coherent commander-in-chief was needed when seconds mattered. In a nuclear age, the president must be occupied at all times. Presidency must be occupied at all times by a man in full possession of his faculties. Colorado Senator John Birmingham also worried about the proposal's failure to directly state something about a nuclear-based attack. I was once a supporter, he said. Now I'm opposed. His opposition makes the newsletter. He also writes to the ABA. He wanted provisions explicitly written into the amendment about a nuclear crisis. Why no provision was included to cover the situation of what would occur if a bomb wiped out the entire city of Washington while our high officials were present? How would the government get started again? Now, the response from Congress is that the drafting committee considered these possibilities, but an amendment cannot cover every possible situation which might be imagined. The amendment was designed to deal only with problems which history has indicated might be likely to reoccur. It does not deal with the subject of atomic holocaust specifically, but the occurrence of atomic destruction under any circumstances would be chaotic. The proposed amendment certainly, he says to the Colorado State Senator, cause no problem to responding during these events. In other words, it's not broken. So what you have after Birmingham's response is, again, the ABA gets involved. They send cards to each of the members of the Colorado legislature asking if they approve or they don't approve this amendment. Birchbuy's office also writes a letter to each member of the legislature. These are things that's, like I said, it's been a while since we dealt with amendment and ratification politics. These are the things that we can expect. You have kind of these state legislative figures raising these questions that may or may not have already been addressed by Congress. I'm sure Congress feels like we talked about this already. Why don't you read the Congressional Journal? But all of a sudden, these state senators and legislators become of outsized importance, but also there's a little bit of a snowball effect with amendments as well. Like, hey, you're not going to be able to make changes to it. We're not sending it back to Congress for changes. So yay or nay, folks. And eventually Birmingham does drop his opposition and Colorado votes. Once Colorado, Arkansas, and Pennsylvania, kind of like 3 regions of the country, support this, you get most of the ratifications within the first year, and then the necessary within the second year. By 1967, it is ratified. That little discussion of the 25th Amendment, I'll end there. My history can beat up your politics. Thanks for supporting and listening to us. www.myhistorycanbeatupyourpolitics.com.
Are you earning and investing in the stock market? In real estate? How about in relationships? Are you earning and investing in your life? I'm Doc G, semi-retired hospice physician and host of the Earn and Invest podcast, where we have the 201 or next level conversations about money and life. Not only how you make money and grow it, but also how you use your wealth to create a better and more fulfilling existence. Join us every Monday and Thursday wherever you listen to fine podcasts.